The air in this place had a taste. It was the flavor of rust and finality, a metallic tang on the tongue, mixed with the dry, sterile scent of ancient machinery and the faintest hint of ozone, as if a lightning strike had been captured and bled dry within these iron walls. For 3 standard hours I had been standing in the Inquisitor's private sanctum, a place whose existence was a heresy to the very concept of maps. It was a wound in the architectural guts of Hive Primus, a space that should not be, carved out from the forgotten foundations of plasteel and rockcrete. My robes, the simple gray of an administrative acolyte, felt absurdly thin, offering no protection from the profound cold that emanated not from the air, but from the very substance of the chamber itself. I was Kaelen, formerly Lex Scrivener, 3rd class of the Orbital Plate Administratum Tithes Office, and this was my first day in the service of the Holy Ordos of the Emperor's Inquisition. The thought was still so vast, so terrifyingly grand, that my mind shied away from its full weight, like a scribe fearing to blot the first illuminated letter of a sacred text. My previous world had been one of light, the steady, white glow of lumen panels over endless aisles of data slate racks. A world of order, of crisp vellum, of the quiet scratch of a stylus, and the soft hum of cogitators processing the endless, sacred arithmetic of the Imperium. I had believed, with the uncomplicated fervor of the truly cloistered, that this was the bedrock of humanity's survival. Order, logic, and the unwavering light of the Emperor's law. It was this devotion, this meticulous talent for finding the single, discordant number in a billion-digit ledger, that had brought me to the attention of Inquisitor Valerius. He had appeared in my sterile world like a thunderclap, a figure of myth clad in black armor and grim purpose. He spoke of a different kind of accounting, not of grain tithes and munitorum shipments, but of He told me my talent for finding patterns in the chaos of bureaucracy could be used to find the deeper, more insidious patterns of heresy. He offered me a chance to serve the Golden Throne not with a stylus, but with a sword, or rather, the knowledge that guides the sword. I accepted without hesitation. My heart swelled with a righteous fire I had only ever read about in the hagiographies of imperial saints. Now that fire felt like a guttering candle in a hurricane. The sanctum was nothing like the cathedrals of faith or the grand halls of imperial justice. It was a workshop, a butcher's shop. The walls were lined not with scriptures, but with weapon racks, holding implements of terrifying design. Manacles, thick and stained, hung from hooks next to arcane scanning devices. One wall was dominated by a vast star chart, but the points of light were not stars. They were marked with inquisitorial runes, some glowing a steady, watchful amber, others a violent, angry crimson. A single, massive desk of pitted iron sat in the center of the room, its surface bare save for a single data slate, its screen dark. This was not a place of prayer or contemplation. It was a place of work. And the work I was beginning to understand with a cold dread that coiled in my stomach was ugly. Every scuff on the floor plates, every dark stain mottling the metal walls seemed to be a silent testament to that truth. The heavy groaning sound of the sanctum's hidden door sliding open made me flinch. Inquisitor Valerius entered, and the oppressive atmosphere in the room seemed to coalesce around him, acknowledging its master. He was not a giant of a man, not like the Astartes of legend, but he possessed a density, a presence that warped the space he occupied. He wore a simple black carapace cuirass over a high-collared tunic, the iconic flared eye of the Inquisition, a stark white brand on his shoulder. One of his eyes was a cold blue augmetic that whirred almost imperceptibly as it scanned me, its analysis far more penetrating than any human gaze. The other, the one of flesh and blood, was ancient, filled with a weariness so profound it seemed to pull the very light from the room into its depths. He did not greet me. He simply moved to the great iron desk, his armored boots ringing with sharp finality on the floor. "You have been patient, Acolyte Kaelen," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the chamber, a low baritone that resonated in my bones. It was the voice of a man accustomed to speaking truths so absolute they required no volume to be obeyed. Patience is the first virtue in our calling. The archenemy has millennia. We have only our fleeting lives. We must therefore make every second a weapon. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry as dust. "I am honored to serve, my Lord Inquisitor." The words sounded thin, reedy, the foolish parroting of a child. He offered a curt nod, his gaze fixed on my face. "Honor is a luxury. We deal in necessity. You came from a world of numbers, of ledgers and defined truths. You believe that 1 + 1 will always equal 2. That adherence to the law is a shield against the dark. You are wrong." He leaned forward slightly, his flesh and blood eye narrowing. "The truth of this galaxy is that the law is a flickering candle in a void of infinite madness. My purpose, and now yours, is not to shield that flame, but to feed it. And the only fuel that burns hot enough is the flesh of the unfit, the souls of the corrupt, the lives of the damned. We are not saviors, Acolyte. We are surgeons, and the patient is humanity. The disease is heresy, and the only cure is the knife, the fire, and the bolt shell." His words hung in the air, cold and sharp. This was the sermon. This was the reality of the Holy War, stripped of all pomp and pageantry. It was brutal, but it was pure. It was necessary. I straightened my back, trying to project the conviction I so desperately wanted to feel. "I understand, Lord Valerius. My life is for the Emperor. I will be whatever instrument you require." A flicker of something, not quite approval, perhaps just a brief cessation of disappointment, passed across his features. He gestured to the dark data slate on his desk. "Your first instrument will be the one you already know. Your mind. Your talent for seeing the rot beneath the pristine surface." He picked up the slate. It was bound in a casing of some kind of deep red material that looked unnervingly like cured leather. "This is the Red Ledger, a project of mine. Inside is a list of names. They are seeds. Seeds of corruption, planted within the body politic of this hive. Some may be active traitors. Some may be dormant carriers of seditious thought. Some may only be guilty of proximity to the unclean. it does not matter. A seed, once planted, will always sprout. Our task is to burn the fields before the harvest. He slid the heavy slate across the desk. It stopped just before my trembling fingers. The name felt apt. The ledger was the color of dried blood. Your task is simple in its definition, yet boundless in its scope, Valerius continued, his augmetic eye glowing a little brighter. You will take the first name on this list. You will use every tool at my disposal: cogitator access, surveillance archives, informant networks, astropathic intercepts. You will build a file. You will learn everything about this individual: their business dealings, their family, their friends, their vices, the name of the grox herder who supplies their meat. You will trace every thread, no matter how insignificant, and when you are done, you will present your findings to me, and I will decide where the scalpel must cut. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. My first true task as an arm of the Inquisition. The hunting of a heretic. I reached out and took the red ledger. It was heavier than it looked, and cold to the touch. I felt a surge of purpose, a holy zeal that pushed back the fear. It will be done, my lord. I will not fail you. See that you do not, he said, turning away from me to gaze at the crimson-lit points on his star chart. The price of failure in our work is not measured in thrones or territory. It is measured in worlds and in souls. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, his attention already 1,000 light years away, contemplating some other, greater fire. I retreated to a small, Spartan alcove adjoining the main sanctum, a cell containing little more than a cogitator terminal and a hard stool. The red ledger was my new scripture. With a deep breath to steady my hands, I activated the slate. The screen flickered to life, bathing my face in a bloody glow. The text was stark, written in a severe Gothic font. It was a simple list of names, each followed by a hive sector designation. I focused on the first entry at the top of the list, the name of the first soul I was to dissect. I expected a title of profane grandeur: Arch-Heretic, Chaos Magus, Xenos Sympathizer. I prepared myself for a name that would reek of blasphemy. Instead, the glowing crimson letters spelled out a name of almost painful mundanity. Joric Galt, Factor, Spire Knitters Guild, Sector Gamma 9. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process the information. A weaver? A guild factor of textiles? My first quarry. The first great threat to the spiritual purity of this hive city was a merchant of fabrics. A knot of confusion tightened in my gut. I had envisioned dark cults in slime-slick underhive tunnels, rogue psychers howling their madness to the uncaring stars, seditious generals plotting betrayal in high spires. Not this. A simple tradesman. The dissonance was jarring. 1,000 questions bloomed in my mind, but I ruthlessly suppressed them. Inquisitor Valerius had said it himself. Heresy could be a dormant seed. The most dangerous threats often wore the most mundane masks. This was my first test. not just of my skills, but of my faith. My faith in the Inquisitor, in the mission, to see the monster hiding behind the ordinary face, to trust the hand that pointed the way, even when the path was shrouded in shadow. I clenched my jaw, the Acolyte's zeal warring with the scholar's confusion. I would trust. I had to. I set the red ledger beside the cogitator terminal and began my work, the name Jorek Galt burning itself behind my eyes. The education of Kaelen had begun. For a week, my world shrank to the size of the cogitator screen and the blood-red slate beside it. The name Jorek Galt was a glyph I etched onto the inside of my skull, a mantra of my new purpose. I fell back on the familiar rituals of my old life, the comforting logic of data collation. If this man was a monster, his monstrousness must have a digital shadow, a footprint in the endless archives of the Imperium. I plunged into the data streams like a pearl diver, holding my breath against the crushing pressure of 1 billion lives lived and logged, searching for a single flawed gem. I cross-referenced Galt's guild certifications with Administratum tithe receipts. Perfect. Every metric ton of spire wool accounted for, every throne of his tax levy paid on time, often early. His contributions to the local Scala Progenium were generous. His family's attendance records at the Imperial Creed services were flawless. I delved deeper, pulling Medicaid records. No history of psychic phenomena. No rejuvenate treatments that might hint at forbidden science. His personal ledgers, acquired through an inquisitorial override that made my fingers tremble, showed a life of tedious fiscal prudence. He haggled with off-world shippers. He paid his workers a standard wage. He set aside funds for his daughter's education. The man emerging from the data was not a heretic. He was a monument to imperial mediocrity. He was a cog in the great machine, polished and functioning exactly as the tech priests of Mars intended. This perfection was in itself a source of profound unease. The Inquisitor had warned me of pristine surfaces hiding rot. Was this it? A mask so flawless, it betrayed the twisted face beneath? The thought gnawed at me. My objective, I reasoned, was to find the crack in the facade. But after 7 cycles of relentless work, sleeping only in short, nightmare-plagued bursts on a cot in my alcove, I had found nothing. The data web around Jorek Galt was not a web of conspiracy, but a tapestry of civic duty. Frustration, a feeling I had rarely known in my ordered past, began to fester. I was failing. Lord Valerius's words echoed in my cold cell. The price of failure is measured in worlds and in souls. Was my soul the price for failing to see the heresy in a weaver? The thought was a cold spike of terror. I pushed it down. I was a scholar, a finder of patterns. If the pattern was not in the official records, then I had to look where the records did not go. The decision felt like a physical threshold, a line of grit on the floor I had to force myself to step over. I needed to see him, to hear him. Inquisitorial clearance gave me access to the city's central sensorium network, a spider's web of picked thieves, vox sniffers, and heat augurs that blanketed the hive's upper levels. My warrant was the unblinking augmetic eye of my master. With a tremor of sacrilege, I bypassed the local enforcer-level security locks and turned the Inquisition's gaze upon Sector Gamma 9. My screen fractured into a dozen moving images, a dozen streams of muffled sound. I felt a surge of illicit power, quickly soured by the taste of shame. I was peering into the unvarnished lives of citizens, violating their privacy in a way I had always believed was the right only of the Emperor himself. This, I told myself, was the work. This was the surgeon's tool. Finding Galt's Hab unit and guild office was simple. I spent hours watching him through the grainy picked feed from a service servitor's optic lens. I saw him break his morning fast with his wife, their conversation a dull murmur about the price of synthgrots. I watched him at his office, a cramped room filled with bolts of cloth, as he dictated shipping manifests to a scribe. He was balding, slightly overweight, with the weary eyes of a man burdened by trivialities. He looked like every minor functionary I had ever served alongside in the Administratum. Where was the demon? Where was the seed of corruption? I listened, my audial senses straining for a whispered blasphemy, a coded, treacherous phrase. I heard him complain about a leaky pipe. I heard him haggle with a dye merchant. I heard him hum a hymn to the Emperor while reviewing his accounts. The man was infuriatingly, damnably normal. The isolation of my task began to wear on me. I hadn't spoken to another soul since my dismissal from Lord Valerius's presence. The sanctum was my tomb and my world. The silence was broken only by the hum of the cogitator and the frantic beating of my own heart. I felt myself changing. The scholar's calm curiosity was being replaced by a hunter's paranoia. Every shadow in the picked feeds could be a clandestine meeting. Every mumbled word a secret code. I was starting to see the heresy I was looking for, not in the evidence, but in my own interpretation of it. The path of the righteous was narrowing into a razor's edge, and I was terrified of falling off. I needed more. I needed to get closer. Data and remote surveillance were shields. It was time to discard them. Lord Valerius had provided me with a small cache of equipment. Among the data slates and code breakers was a device no larger than my thumbnail, a microvox and surveyor. Its chitinous black casing seemed to absorb the light. Planting it would require me to leave the sanctum, to enter the hive itself, to physically intrude upon Joric Galt's life, to step out of the theoretical and into the real. I dressed in the drab, anonymous overalls of a low-level Mechanicus adept, pulling a hood low over my face. The journey from the Inquisitor's hidden sanctum to the hive proper was a disorienting transit through groaning service lifts and lightless, echoing tunnels. The air grew thick and wet, the metallic tang of the sanctum replaced by the overwhelming miasma of the hive, the stink of recycled water, of a billion unwashed bodies packed into a cage of steel, of nutrient paste and ozone from failing power conduits. When I finally emerged into a mid-level concourse in Sector Gamma 9, the sensory assault nearly drove me to my knees. After the monastic silence of my work, the noise was a physical blow. The roar of transport crawlers on the high bridges, the cacophony of 1,000 different vendors hawking their wares, the ceaseless, pounding rhythm of a manufactorum deep in the hive's guts. A sound felt more in the bones than in the ears. Crowds of humanity surged around me, a river of pale, tired faces, under the sickly yellow glare of the lumen strips far above. This was the Imperium I had sworn to protect, this seething, struggling mass of souls. Staring into their blank eyes, I felt a terrifying sense of detachment. I was no longer one of them. I was the watcher, the ghost at their feast, the silent judge. The feeling of isolation became a physical chasm, separating me from the very people I was meant to serve. Finding Galt's Spire Knitters Guild office was easy enough. It was a modest storefront tucked between a corpse starch dispensary and a reconsecrated machine parts dealer. The air hung thick with the smell of lanolin and chemical dyes. My plan was simple, and that simplicity terrified me. I would pose as a mechanicus adept, checking the integrity of the power conduits, a common enough occurrence to hopefully pass without comment. I entered the shop, a small bell chiming my arrival. A young woman, Galt's daughter perhaps, looked up from behind the counter. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the hive's roar. I mumbled the excuse I had rehearsed 100 times, my voice cracking. She looked at me with simple, bovine incomprehension and waved me towards the back office. The Emperor, it seemed, favored the bold, or perhaps just the pathetic. Galt's office was exactly as I had seen it in the pict feeds, only now it was real. The smell of the fabrics was cloying. The piles of vellum felt brittle under my gloved fingers. I could hear him in the main shop, his voice a low drone as he spoke with a customer. I worked quickly, my hands shaking so violently I was afraid I would drop the tiny surveyor. I knelt beside his desk, pretending to examine a power junction, and with a swift, clumsy movement, I pressed the surveyor's adhesive side to the underside of the heavy wood. It clung there, a tiny black parasite, a seed of my own planting. My first true act as an agent of the Inquisition was not a noble strike against a heretic, but a sordid, cowardly act of espionage against a textile merchant. I felt no righteous zeal, only a profound and sickening self-loathing. I finished my inspection and fled the shop, melting back into the anonymous river of the crowd, the chime of the bell behind me sounding like a death knell. Back in the cold security of my alcove, I tuned the receiver. The surveyor was working perfectly. I could hear everything: the rustle of parchments, the scratch of a stylus, the soft sigh of Galt settling into his chair. For 2 more days, I listened to the life of Jorek Galt, a voyeur of the mundane. And then I heard it, the change. It was a meeting, late after the day's business was done. Another man was in the office, his voice sharp and angry. Galt's was low, pleading. My blood ran cold. This was it. The clandestine meeting. The conspiracy. I leaned closer to the Vox receiver, my entire being focused on the whispered conversation. "Must be more careful, Jorek," the sharp-voiced man said. "Prefect Valchek has his informers everywhere. If he learns you've been making inquiries with the off-world tithe auditors, what choice do I have, Remus?" Galt's voice was strained, filled with a desperate integrity that resonated with the man I used to be. The prefect is stealing. I've seen the Munitorum manifests. He's declaring ghost shipments of guard-issue blankets, billing the Departamento for the fabric, and selling the raw materials on the black market. The Emperor's brave soldiers on the Scythian front are freezing in the mud so Valchek can line his coffers. My mind froze. I stopped breathing. This wasn't heresy. This wasn't chaos worship or a Xenos plot. This was administrative corruption. The kind of grubby, everyday sin that the Administratum was supposed to handle. "That's not your concern," Remus hissed. "Your concern is your guild, your family. Valchek is a powerful man. He has friends in high places. You're a weaver, Jorik. You cannot fight a man like that. And loyalty is not silence in the face of theft from the Imperial war machine. It is our duty to report it. It is the law." The conversation continued, but I barely heard it. My universe, the carefully constructed edifice of my new faith, was crumbling. The cold dread from my first day in the sanctum returned. But now it was a tidal wave. Jorik Galt wasn't a heretic threatening the Imperium. He was a patriot trying to uphold it. He was a threat not to the Golden Throne, but to a corrupt local official named Valchek. With trembling fingers, I activated the red ledger and moved to the second name on the list. Lyra Svorn, Water Pump Foreman, Sector Epsilon 4. A new frenzy seized me. I tore through the archives, no longer looking for heresy, but for a different pattern. I found it in 3 hours. Lyra Svorn had filed a complaint, a brave and foolishly detailed report that contaminated water was being knowingly diverted from the purification plants to the lower hive cisterns by a cartel with ties to a local noble house. The third name, a preacher named Helon, had delivered a series of sermons condemning the obscene decadence of that same noble house. The pattern was not heresy. It was inconvenient truth. It was loyalty. It was righteousness. I pushed back from the cogitator, my stool scraping loudly in the crushing silence. I stared at the red ledger, its crimson casing now seeming to mock me. It wasn't a list of the damned. It was a list of the decent, the brave, the foolish. It was an extermination order for anyone who threatened the comfortable, corrupt order that men like Prefect Valchek and his high-placed friends enjoyed. And Inquisitor Valerius, he was their instrument, their scalpel. He wasn't burning out the cancer of heresy. He was cutting out the healthy tissue that was trying to fight off the disease of corruption. The surgeon was a butcher, and the butcher was a monster, and I was his apprentice. The truth landed on me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless. I was utterly, completely alone, trapped in a cage of iron and shadow, holding a list of good men I was tasked with condemning to death. My education was complete. My innocence was dead. The silence in my alcove was no longer a simple absence of sound. It had become a presence, a solid thing pressing in on me from all sides, suffocating me with the weight of my discovery. For a full rotation of the hive's chronos, I did not move. I sat on the hard stool, my body rigid, staring at the crimson slate as if it were the severed head of a saint. My past self, the righteous scholar Kaelen, was dead. He had died in this cold, iron-walled room, not from a bolt shell or a chainsword, but from a simple, undeniable truth. The universe was not a flawed but noble design of the Emperor's making. It was a charnel house, and the men who claimed to be its guardians were merely the chief butchers, carving it up to suit their own appetites. Inquisitor Valerius was not a shield against the dark. He was the dark. A new feeling, colder and harder than the dread it replaced, began to crystallize in the ruin of my soul. It was a terrifying crystalline clarity. My horror curdled into something else, something I could not yet name. It was the acceptance of a terminal diagnosis. There was no escape. I could not flee. Every servitor, every cogitator, every door in this fortress was his. I could not fight. I was a scribe, and he was a lord of the Holy Inquisition. To oppose him was to be declared a heretic in truth, and to die screaming in some forgotten oubliette. My death would not save Jorek Galt, or Lyris Forn, or the preacher Helon. It would be a meaningless spasm of defiance, a footnote in a file that no one would ever read. There was only one path forward. It was not a path to salvation, or redemption, or even survival in any sense I would have once understood. It was a path deeper into the darkness. I had been brought here to be an instrument. Very well. I would learn to be the instrument he required. I stood, my joints cracking in protest. I picked up my data slate containing the complete, damning file on the loyalty and integrity of Jorek Galt. Then, I began the long walk back to the Inquisitor's sanctum. The corridor felt different now. Before, it had been a place of intimidating shadow and sacred purpose. Now, I saw it for what it was. The sterile passage between a cage and an abattoir. My footsteps echoed with a leaden finality. I was not walking to deliver a report. I was walking to my own damnation. And I was doing it with my eyes wide open. The great iron door hissed open before me, and I stepped inside. Inquisitor Valerius stood exactly where I had last seen him, his back to me, gazing at the crimson lights on his star chart. He did not turn. He knew I was there. The silence stretched, a wire pulled taut. He was giving me the stage, letting me perform. "My Lord Inquisitor," I began, my voice a dry rasp, utterly devoid of the trembling reverence it had once held. "I have completed my initial investigation into the subject, Jorek Galt." "And?" Valerius asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor plates. He still did not look at me. I took a breath, the cold metallic air a balm on the fire in my chest. This was the moment. The precipice. "My lord, the subject is not what we expected. He is not a follower of the ruinous powers. He does not traffic with Xenos. He is not a psyker, latent or otherwise." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. By every metric available, by every standard of the Imperial Creed and the Lex Imperialis, Jorek Galt is a model citizen. He is devout, industrious, and fiercely loyal to the Golden Throne. Now, Valerius turned. Slowly. His augmetic eye whirred, focusing on me with an unnerving intensity. He was waiting to see if I had truly learned anything at all. I held his gaze. I did not falter. "And that, my lord," I continued, my voice steady and cold, "is precisely what makes him such a profound threat. A flicker of something, interest perhaps, in his organic eye. "Explain," he commanded. The word was a scalpel, inviting me to lay myself open. "A simple heretic is a cancer cell," I said, the words coming to me from a place I did not recognize, a cold, logical abyss that had opened within me. "It is malignant, but it is comprehensible. We know its nature, we can excise it. But Jorek Galt is something far more dangerous. He is an autoimmune response. He is a loyal cell that has identified a sickness in the body politic, in this case, the corruption of Prefect Valchek, and is attempting to fight it. On the surface, this is commendable, but we are not battlefield medics, my lord. We are surgeons responsible for the whole. What Galt fails to understand is that the sickness he has found is a functional, necessary part of the organism of this hive." I stepped closer to the desk, placing my data slate upon its iron surface. Prefect Valchek's corruption, his skimming from the Munitorum tithes, is a stabilizing factor in the local hierarchy. It keeps the Spire nobles placated and complicit. It oils the wheels of commerce and governance. The loss of a few thousand blankets to the Imperial Guard is a statistically acceptable price to pay for the continued, predictable functioning of an entire hive sector that produces a full tenth of this world's annual armor-grade plasteel. I looked Valerius directly in his mismatched eyes. Jorek Galt's idealism, his naive belief in absolute justice, threatens to disrupt that stability. If he exposes Valchek, he does not simply remove a corrupt official. He creates a power vacuum. He invites investigation from higher authorities who do not understand the delicate balance of this place. He inspires other fools to ask other inconvenient questions. He risks strikes, riots, drops in production. He is a spanner aimed at the very heart of the machine, thrown with the best and most loyal of intentions. He is a threat, not to the Imperium's soul, but to its body. His righteousness is a more potent form of sedition than any whispered prayer to a dark god. He is the seed, my lord, not of heresy, but of chaos, and he must be removed. The silence that followed was absolute. The whirring of the Inquisitor's augmetic was the only sound in the universe. He stared at me, his face an unreadable mask of iron and flesh. I had laid my soul bare. I had shown him the monster he had created. I had passed his unspoken test. He reached out and picked up my data slate, his gaze never leaving my face. He did not look at the screen. He did not need to. Then, for the first time since I had met him, Inquisitor Valerius smiled. It was not a smile of warmth or humor. It was a terrifying sight. A brief, predatory baring of teeth, a look of grim and absolute approval. It was the smile of a master craftsman admiring a newly sharpened tool. "Good," he said. The single word was my absolution and my eternal condemnation. You see, you finally see the truth behind the truth. The Imperium is not sustained by ideals, Acolyte. It is sustained by control, and control is a far more demanding god than faith. He turned from me and walked to one of the weapon racks on the wall. He took down a compact, brutally efficient-looking auto pistol and a holster. He laid them on the desk beside the red ledger. "Jorik Galt will have an accident at his manufactorum," Valeria stated, not as a suggestion, but as a fact that had already been entered into the great ledger of history. "A team will... You will now prove you have the stomach for it." I looked from the crimson slate to the black steel of the pistol. The choice was not a choice at all. It was merely the next logical step. The scholar was dead. The acolyte remained. I unbuckled the simple rope belt of my scribe's robes and strapped on the heavy leather holster, the cold weight of the pistol a shocking, solid presence against my hip. I was no longer an accountant of souls. I was becoming one of his reapers. "I understand, my lord," I said. My voice was the voice of a stranger. "This log is the last thing I will write as the man I once was. It is a final testament to the death of Kaelen, Lex Scrivener 3rd class. He was a fool, but he was an innocent fool, and he deserved some small epitaph. The man who leaves this room will not be him. The man who leaves this room will carry a ledger of good people and a gun to silence them. He will see the rot in the foundations of the Imperium, and his holy duty will be to paint over it with blood, to ensure the grand, beautiful, damned facade never cracks. My education is complete. My first day is over, and my true service has just begun."